I've been wanting to make this video for a very long time because so often I get asked, what is mindfulness? So I'll explain in detail because most of the time I feel all we hear is observe without judgment and stay in the present moment. But we don't know why and what that actually means. So I want to talk a little bit about the science behind it as well. And I'm going to start by saying that mindfulness is one of many types of meditation. And because I'm talking about meditation, let me just very briefly say that meditation is a concentration. So it's a means of retraining our attention. It helps our memory function, it lowers your stress levels, your anxiety levels, and obviously linked to that, it improves your physical health too. So for example, it can boost your immunity and lower inflammation. So that's actual physical markers for change in the body. Mindfulness stems from Buddhism, and it's made its way into the Western mainstream in the 1970s thanks to a microbiologist called Jon Kabat-Zinn, who introduced his very own version of mindfulness as a form of stress reduction and pain management. And he added yoga and pranayama, which is part of yoga, into the mix as well. Mindfulness is a practice of becoming consciously aware of this moment right now without making any judgment, with no agenda as to what should happen next. So we simply note without reactivity whatever comes into the mind, external impressions as well as how our body perceives them. And instead of reacting, we'll just experience these sensations and we let them go. So we're always staying in the present moment, engaged, aware, but never judging anything as good or as bad. Often a mindfulness meditation will start with a focus on the sensation of the breath. And we do that for two reasons. So one is that a breath-based meditation on a very basic and immediate level will activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So that part of the autonomic nervous system which calms you after a bout of stress. It metabolizes or lets you metabolize your stress hormones and makes way for the production of happy hormones. And while all that is going on physically and chemically, your brain waves go from agitated to calm as well. The other reason why we're focusing on the breath is because the breath is neutral. We don't tend to think of our breath as a good thing or a bad thing. It's just there. So it's an easy gateway into observing without passing any kind of judgment. From there, we continue observing other physical sensations. We register and investigate and observe to see if we can transform our relationship to whatever we're sensing at a given place in the body. So if something feels good, can we stick with experiencing this without wanting more? And if something is highly unpleasant, can we still just observe with interest and detachment, without frustration, without putting a label on this sensation? And that lets us stop evaluating our pain, for example, as in, this hurts, I don't like it, and instead just feel the sensation. This burns, this stings, it feels numb, whatever it is we're feeling. So we'll start noticing these very subtle, different flavors of a sensation. And we can then decouple the higher and lower regions of the brain that make us feel pain from each other. So that brain function and that functional decoupling, what it's called in neuroscience, is basically that combined feeling of ouch. That ouch that we are feeling is different parts of the brain working together. There's the sensory circuitry, which even when we're decoupling, will feel the pain as vibration. But there's also the thoughts, there's the emotional reactivity and the psychological resistance to pain, the negative feelings about pain. And all of that can be decoupled so that your pain is still there, just as a sensation though, and not as the judgment of this is painful. So it's a sensation and the perception of it has changed. And this change of our relationship to pain is just one of many examples of how we can slowly rewire our brain into passing less and less judgment on all other impressions that we have. So to lengthen that period of non-judgment, of equanimity, that means of calmness and composure. So any sensory impressions, sight, sound, smell, taste, touch, but also thoughts and emotions and habits, stereotypes, unconscious biases, they're all manifestations of physical sensations. What happens in the brain is that all impressions like that hit our brainstem first. Everything that comes to us is going to the brainstem first. And that is the oldest, most primitive part of the brain. And it is non-conceptual. That means it doesn't judge. There's no judgment happening in the brainstem. All that happens there is we're registering something, we're logging information, if you will. From the brainstem, it goes on to the younger, more evolved prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that's often referred to as the brain's CEO, because this is where information is analyzed, labeled, and judged. And this takes a few milliseconds. But the more we practice non-judgment, the longer that period of millisecond can become. And that doesn't mean that it's going to be seconds until we pull our hand away from a hot stove, but even a couple of milliseconds more is enough for you to become less prone to rash decisions and less prone to constantly judge things that you don't need to judge. We need to judge some things, but we don't need to judge all the time. We're just making life harder for ourselves. So this self-observation and observation that essentially mindfulness is, helps us reacquaint ourselves with our bodies so that we can learn to spot the triggers that set us off, because we all have them and they have been learned ever since we were babies. So we can now learn to preempt our destructive emotions. And when I say destructive emotions, it's not actually just the aversion, the anger, the hatred, the frustration, all of these emotions that in our society are considered undesirable. It's also the liking, the wanting, the craving, which can lead to addiction. So this is why we're not labeling a sensation as good either. We just accept that it's there and that it will pass, because everything that happens in and around us is temporary. So we don't need to get attached and we don't need to be averse to anything, because it's just temporary. And when we really can stop labeling things as good or as bad, then our mind's equilibrium is never going to be disturbed. That means our amygdala, our emotional center, our center for stress and fear, never goes into overdrive. It doesn't have to. So we're less likely to judge ourselves, we're less likely to judge others, and instead we're going to see situations as they are, and we'll know what we know for a fact without jumping to conclusions. And this can become a character trait rather than just a state that you're in while either you're concentrating on your meditation or a state you're in when you're particularly happy because you're on holiday. So that is what mindfulness is. Questions and comments, very welcome. And that took a little bit longer than I thought it would. Thank you for watching.